The third victim owns up to the murder of the second victim.
Oh my God, come on.
It says, I killed him, I'm so sorry. And then it says, this is verbatim, BTW, do not blame the other guy whose house I was with, the guy in the flat across the road. He was nothing to do with it.
No, it doesn't fucking say that.
It says BTW.
You fuck off. It says that.
It says
this
the
is.
guy
Are
in
you
the
reading
flat
off 4chan? Double check the URL.
And the police went, nothing suspicious here.
And it's alright. Redistribution party. 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 And it's alright. Redistribution party.
Hello, friends, and welcome to Mandatory Redistribution Party. I'm Jack Lewis Evans.
And my name is Sean Morley.
Sean, before we begin, would you like to do a murder?
I've actually always been desperate to do a murder. I'm really keen, but sadly I am too scared.
Scared of snuffing out a life? Scared of removing possibility from an innocent? Scared of nights made sleepless by guilt?
Oh, no, none of those, in fact. I'm just scared of that dang slammer, the rozzers, the loud sirens in my wee ears, scared of someone whispering Cockney rhyming slang across the darkness of a wet cell.
That's fucked. Well, you've got some food for thought coming up in this episode, which is about the rationales given for the repressive powers of the state.
And I suppose we're going to talk about murders a lot, so if you don't want to hear about murders, you can skip to the end of the episode where we thank you for listening.
And we'll also thank you for supporting us on Patreon, which you can do at patreon.com/mandatory redistribution party. Thank you very much to those of you who do support us on there.
And for those of you without a coin to your name, we also accept praise, especially praise that's about us, but directed to your friends and family.
Right, you ready to begin?
Just one thing first.
Yeah? Two can play at that game.
Goodbye, my friend. Is Jonathan Creek Copaganda?
Because he's not technically a cop, is he? He's just a magician that snitches.
He's not remotely a cop.
No.
He's not even a magician.
He comes up with the magic for people with charisma.
Yeah, he's just like one of the writers for a magician who does the tricks. And he's not even assisting a police officer. He's assisting a journalist.
Right.
So even though there's no actual police officers involved in the main cast, is it nevertheless Copaganda?
It's just a magician solving very elaborate crimes. A magician. Actually, tell you what, I believe that if you conceive of magic tricks and your profession is to conceptualize, perform magic, a magician still appropriately describes you, even though if you don't perform it.
If you conceive of magic tricks in your own head, you're a magician.
If your income comes from conceiving magic tricks and selling them to performance magicians, you are perhaps more even of a magician than the person who just has the ability to perform the things you created, because you're creating the ideas.
Yeah, it's the writer-performer dichotomy, right? Mm-hmm. You can have someone purely write and someone purely perform.
It's complicated. There's grey areas there. So I'm comfortable referring to Jonathan Creek as a magician. I'm just getting that down now.
Okay.
Because otherwise I'm going to be searching for a word
out of the way.
I'm going to be searching for a word to describe Jonathan Creek that's just going to slam the brakes on whatever this discussion is.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm happy to call him a magician.
Yeah, okay.
Nomenclature confirmed. Now back to my original question.
Yeah, I don't know if Jonathan Creek's Copaganda, because I guess he sometimes helps the police. I haven't watched Jonathan Creek for over a decade, so I can't remember how the police feature in it. But one thing I would say, one of my Copaganda takes, is that so many stories that are out there are about cops, partly because it's useful to write cop stories, because the way stories work, finding out a piece of information, the process of discovery is a really important aspect of story writing, and it's kind of a cheat code because the highest end of storytelling, characters change, whereas it's a kind of a hack to just gain more information because you can create the kind of fast food version of quality storytelling. What changes is the amount of information you have, and then you behave differently because you have different information. So cops in society are a thing people are familiar with that in fiction investigating are kind of detectives and stuff like that. Same with like private investigators. So there's like story reasons that cops are in loads of stuff, but also that people try to write cops as in like, these problematic characters who are, deeply flawed and sometimes like completely horrible. But even if you write a story that's like about deeply flawed and horrible cops, more often you end up, because that's the character you follow, that's who you're sympathizing and empathizing and going on the journey with, then it's still kind of Copaganda because but structurally puts you in the sort of cop's perspective, even if it's saying they suck.
And I guess unless they're like terrible at their job and it's a completely pointless show, they are still solving the crimes, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So no matter how much of a bastard the policeman is, always in some way it's all justified because they keep the streets safe. And if they don't, then what are you watching? Just someone going around going, I don't know what this is. I don't know who did this.
The Wire tries to do like a structural critique of both the cops and prison and stuff like that. But then even then, I don't know. I think there's limitations to it. By the way, I love The Wire, and I also love loads of cop shows. So,
and I'm saying this as someone who is smashing Columbo at the moment.
Yeah, Columbo fucking rules.
Columbo. Columbo's got good class analysis, and he solves crime by looking like a piece of shit. He looks awful,
and the villains are almost always rich, horrible fuckers.
But you've got to say Columbo's still Copaganda, though, because it still launders the reputation of the police.
And the systemic and structural purpose and function of the police. Yeah.
And do you think it stops being Copaganda entirely, just provided the people who are solving the crimes
are magicians,
are not actually part of the... Or even just like Miss Marple. She wasn't a police officer, was she? She was just sort of a busybody.
Yeah. The famous five.
But I'm gonna say that potentially they are still Copaganda.
Oh, I'm ready to be convinced by this.
All of these things almost always revolve around murder, and the prevalence of murder, as absurd as it is in all of these places, and also the strange means in which they're carried out to make murder interesting, creates this idea that murder is a constant threat to your life, and that you need specialized individuals to come in and explain and safeguard you from murder. So even though it's coming from a storytelling perspective of like, these make good stories, right from Victorian Penny Dreadfuls, right to like the Sherlock Holmes remake, there's a constant of, there's a murder, exciting. Who did this murder? Well, I don't know. This guy does. Everyone come to the drawing room right now. This feeling that like, oh, everyone's going to get murdered, and murder happens in these Rube Goldberg complicated ways, creates a feeling that there's a lot more crime in the world, but you also need specialists to deal with these, right? Outsiders that you call in.
Because they never have a cop that just investigates extremely elaborate Rube Goldberg theft. And if there is a story about extremely elaborate theft, it will be in favor of the criminals, like an Ocean's movie. People love heists.
Yeah. You never get a film like that where it's like, let's do a murder. Okay, here's the team.
A crack team of assassins. Oh my God, I would watch the fuck out of that though.
Let's murder an old man and take all his money. Okay, here's the team. We got Johnny Legs. He's going to come. He's going to kick the door
shit
down.
out of him, yeah.
Then we got Beluga. He's just coming from Russia. Ex-KGB. He's going to blow the fucking doors out. Let's kill this old guy.
There's a bit where it seems like the plan's gone wrong and they've killed the wrong person.
We killed a different old guy. Oh no. And then all the team go off and they go back. Beluga goes back to Russia. Everyone goes back to where they were. Some of them just going back to like play horse against the walls of the estate. But one of them still believes. Johnny Fists. And he comes around, he's got gold-plated fists, and he comes around all the different ones and gives them a pep talk. It's all grayscale where they've gone back to the estate or back to, like, Moscow. We can do it. We can still kill this old guy. He's still got loads of money.
Why do you need money? Your fists are already made of gold. Yeah, I'm not going to sell them. I need them.
I'm not going to sell my fists. While they're fists at the moment, I also use them as hands.
Yeah, but why are they gold? Couldn't you get another prosthetic? Well,
They're not prosthetic. I was born this way.
Johnny Goldhands.
Johnny Goldhand. So that's why you just don't see any Johnny Goldhand style films.
No.
For probably a number of reasons now that we've summarised the entire plot. My thesis here is that you don't need to be a cop show to be Copaganda. You just need to push big murder, scary world agenda. Second to that, I am pretty convinced if you tried to do one of the really bizarro, elaborate Rube Goldberg murders from Columbo or Jonathan Creek, you would get away with it.
If we want to get into how effective the police are at actually doing investigations.
Yeah.
Never mind the frequency of like unhinged Hannibal / True Detective murders. They would not, you would get away with it.
Because I used to read a lot of That's Life magazine on the loo.
Yeah.
And I never saw, and this is where someone's done a big Rube Goldberg murder with like 5 different parts, and then one of the walls span round, and actually it looked like coffee, but it was poison.
Yeah.
It never happens. Or if it does happen, it's never found out about. Because you would hear about that. They would make amazing stories. You wouldn't need detective shows. You could watch the news, right? So how come we live in a world which is, on one hand, we're told it's full of murder, right?
Yeah.
We need people to protect us from murder. And that is one of the reasons for existing for the police force. Someone could come and murder you.
They don't protect you from murder. Murder just happens, and then they hunt down the people who've done it.
I mean, in terms of the pitch, the pitch to the public for having the police.
Yeah.
If you're going to Dragon's Den and pitching it, I think that sentence would come up.
You know all this private property you've got?
Yeah.
Aren't you worried about someone taking it? Yeah, I'm actually worried about that, yeah.
I'm actually worried about that,
Yeah, okay. I've got an idea. Group of lads, they can do violence, no one else can. And when they do violence, it's called force. Jedi, are they Jedi?
Oh, that's really good. Yeah. We hadn't seen Star Wars when we started working on this, but we're going to incorporate that straight away.
We'll put a thing that makes the zhoo noise in a baton.
Yeah. We're all going to wear high-vis, flowery robes down to our ankles. All these high-vis robe people, our main job is just to harass anyone outside of the same class status of the owner of the building.
But they would definitely be like, we will stop murders.
Exactly, right? Because you can't pitch it to the public and being like, we're going to stop you going in that building. That's not, you couldn't get a consensus position on that, right? So
their social function is the defense of private property, which you'll see them doing way more than you'll see them stopping murders. But the pitch is more so on the stopping murder than the protecting private property. Yeah, 100%.
In reality, the police are more of a threat to urban explorers than serial killers.
Yes.
But despite that, we also have these TV shows, hugely popular, which give you a complete blueprint on how to do a premeditated murder in cold blood and never get caught.
Yeah.
Which there's no evidence that the actual police in real life know how to solve.
By talking about Copaganda, we're talking about the entirely wrong thing. What we should actually be talking about is Murder School. Everyone's watching Murder School.
Everyone's watching Murder School, but where are the murders? Everyone has flunked Murder School.
Now, I think a lot of people have consumed so much of that most people would be able to do a murder and get away with it if they chose to do it.
But they
They don't. Yeah.
They just don't do that. Do you want some murder stats?
Hit me.
Murders are pretty low.
Yeah.
About 700 reported murders a year on the highest end, but on average at the moment, it's about like 10 people in a million are murdered in England and Wales. But also prosecutions for murders, like anyone being suspected of it and charged, is like less than 10%. If you do a murder, you are 90% chance that you're going to get away with it. And when it comes to what the murders are, it's normally stabbings, blunt force, occasionally a strangulation. It's like spur of the moment. I have a knife on me and I'm in an extreme situation of some kind, whether I'm like part of some kind of gang or something organized, or whether I'm just really angry, or whether I'm just something extreme has happened to me, or I have become extreme through some reason. What it isn't, it's like a 5-part revolving wall, different kinds of poisons on a lazy Susan.
And they can still only get 10% of them.
They're idiot mode murders, right?
Yeah.
They're not like giganto brain murders.
Yeah.
And so there is every reason to believe if you wanted to go and do a giganto brain murder, which I think will only cost you about $2,000.
Yeah.
I say you can do a giganto brain murder on the cheap for around $2,000.
I think you could do a pretty big murder and actually net gain and just call it austerity. Yeah.
That's quite a big murder.
Multi-murder.
Ultra kill.
Achievement unlocked. Platinum.
Rampage.
Consequences, 0. Actually, no, consequences, electoral gain.
Consequences. You resigned because you kissed an aide rather than killing over 100,000 people. Oh, I'm going to have to go down history as someone who just loved to kiss.
Combo.
People just don't seem to want to murder that much.
I don't want to murder.
I don't want to. Do you know? I think
people I fucking hate, and I don't want to murder anyone.
I think a lot of people think that if the purge happened, like murder became legal, they just think everyone would start murdering. They just think it would be murder town. But if the purge really happened, I think you would get maybe a few people dressed up as clowns, and you would get the odd stabbing, right?
We're not denying that.
But I still think the buses would run approximately as on time as they do now. I think you could still get the same products from the shops. I think most things fairly normal. Might be a few more. There'll be loads of dine and dashes because people think the purge, all crime is legal. It's mainly going to affect small restaurants.
There might be more.
It's not going to be a
heists.
murder.
Like if you could have a go at doing a heist with a safety net of there wouldn't be consequences, you might try a heist.
You might do heists, yeah, but it wouldn't become murder town.
There'd be a lot more urban exploring.
Urban exploring
Would
through
skyrocket,
the roof.
yeah.
Dine and dash would be so big that restaurants would just shut for the purge. Sorry, we're shut for the purge. You've got to do Just Eat. Can't dine and dash on Just Eat.
You go into a restaurant on purge day, and then you see the 3 people before you. Just as you're going in, you're asking for a take. Oh, can I have a table for 2, please? People get up and you go, whoa, where are you going? Dan and Dash is having a real nightmare, and you're like, yeah, it's really bad when people do that, isn't it?
Yeah, I hate when people do that.
Table for 2, please.
Yeah, can I have a table by the door?
Just hell champagne.
Yeah.
What's the point of the police? Is the point of the police to solve crimes? The solution rate of crimes in the UK is about 25%. That's 1 in 4. 3 in 4 crimes go unsolved. On top of that, remember that a lot of that 25% that is solved is made up of such challenging crimes as
a 14-year-old black lad I arbitrarily harassed had a tiny bit of weed in his pocket.
Is the point of the police to uphold justice? Do they uphold justice when they ride horses into peaceful protesters? Were they upholding justice when they brutalised pickets at Bryant Colouring Plant in 1974, Grunwick in 1977 or Orgreave in 1984? Were they upholding justice when they framed the Birmingham 6, the Guildford 4 and the Maguire 7? What about Hillsborough Stadium in 1989? Or when they spied on the family of Stephen Lawrence? Is the point of police to protect people? Like they protected Sean Rigg? Like they protected Julian Cole, like they protected Sarah Reid, Edson DaCosta, Jermaine Baker, Ian Tomlinson, Mark Duggan, Jermaine Baker, Jean-Charles de Menezes, Jimmy Mabenga. Of all these victims of UK police, not a single cop was convicted. The last time a police officer was convicted for a death in custody was 1969. Despite the popular idea of the police as a thin blue line between us, whoever us is, and total chaos, the police aren't very good at solving crimes, upholding justice, or protecting us. Empirical studies into the police repeatedly find the same problems: low rates of crime solution, being useless at prosecuting white-collar crime, i.e. rich people crime, racism, protecting themselves as an organisation from scrutiny or consequence. The police seem to be really bad at their job if we see their job as what it's supposed to be in our heads, in our common cultural understanding. Unless, of course, the answer to what's the point of the police is something else. Unless the point of the police is to uphold existing social relations, private property, white supremacy in the state, then they're pretty fucking good at it. Think about when and why the police were created. The first professional English police force wasn't created in England. It was created in Ireland. The Dublin Police Act in 1786 created a professional, uniformed and armed police force in Dublin in response to resistance to English rule. They were made to prevent organised resistance. In 1798, London was the biggest port in the world, and its merchants wanted to protect their stuff, their property, from thieves. They financed the first professional police force in London, the Thames River Police. They were made to protect private property. The first official professional police force as an arm of the state on English soil, though, that's the Metropolitan Police Department of London, the Met, created in 1829 by Tory Home Secretary Robert Peel.
That's why they call them Bobbies. Robert, Bobby Peel. Their other nickname being Coppers because of them. Like grabbing people, like Copperfield.
When first introduced, the police were not popular. People routinely mocked them in the streets. And that's interesting because that's kind of the point of why they were created. The social function of police is to uphold the current order and be seen to have legitimacy to do so. Basically, they don't just want to use the military. Think of the Peterloo massacre. 18 protesters were killed when the cavalry charged into a crowd in Manchester demanding democratic reforms. Part of why the backlash was such a problem for the British state was the cavalry were soldiers. They needed to create a new institution that would conceal the naked violence of the state, and that's where the police come in. Make sure they don't have guns or swords either, because you can enact violence not through their direct actions, but through the mechanisms of like jail, the death penalty, and transportation. People kind of saw straight through this. In 1833, only a few years after the Met was created, Police Constable Robert Cully was stabbed in the chest at Coldbath Field. This was the first confrontation between working class protesters and the Met. The crowd at Coldbath Field assembled to listen to speeches arguing for greater democratic reform in the UK. The Met was sent in to shut them down. The police charged the crowd, trapping some protesters in a nearby street. Cully was stabbed by a protester struggling to get out. There was an inquest into his death in 1833. This was done by a public jury. The jury declared Cully's death as justifiable homicide. They concluded that police violence had provoked the crowd, and the actions of his killer, who was never caught, were justified. This verdict was met with cheers. The jury were given medals and a celebratory boat ride down the Thames. They were seen as defenders of freedom, heroes. Whatever the 1833 equivalent of today's bootlicking cop simps, were vastly outnumbered. Since the 1830s, the police have increased their perceived legitimacy. Job done in that regard. And sure, a lot of people hate cops, but I don't think there'd be a celebratory boat ride for anyone vindicating the stabbing of a cop today.
Let's be real, a jury like that would never be given the chance to even make that decision today.
But with their greater perceived legitimacy, they've also increased the scope of their actions. One revealing aspect of this has to be what's known as the Spy Cops scandal. Since the wave of protests that spread across the world in 1968, the UK police started infiltrating hundreds of political groups. They had always recruited informants that would get paid to snitch on their comrades. Now they took it to another level, creating fake identities and joining groups themselves. Who are these dangerous groups the police are going to go to such lengths to protect us from? Well, the vast majority are left-wing, progressive and environmental groups that challenge the existing social order. There's a lot about this that is fucked up, but one particular part that is especially fucked up is the fact that at least 20 undercover officers deceived women into intimate sexual relationships to get information and undermine these groups. In the words of one victim who had a child with an undercover officer posing as an animal rights activist, she felt she had been, be prepared, this is quite extreme, but I think justified language, raped by the state. After her son was born, this woman became less involved in activism and therefore became a less valuable source to the undercover police officer she had married, and he became increasingly distant. These actions by an individual would be horrendous, but that there's an organisation that tells people to do this, that trains people to do this, that pays people to do this, is to me even more horrifying. And to what end? To ensure environmentalism doesn't advance? To maintain the existing system in all its unsustainable cruelty? What is the point of the police?
So, we've been sold on this idea. Society, which I'm going to define here as a world where people aren't constantly murdering each other, is something that has been granted to us through the civilizing effects of law and police. If there wasn't a law which said don't murder people, do you think that would make a difference?
No, I mean, I don't. I think people kind of figure that shit out. The big bads, the big social bads, are pretty obviously socially bad. It's why I'm sure it's lodged in your brain, you know, from the new atheism era of like, well, where'd you get morality from? Oh, did you need someone to explain not to murder? Did you need a higher being to tell you to not murder?
I think there's like some real big deep down philosophies at play when it's not a new thing. Like Hobbes was writing in somewhere in the 16th century,
17th century, during the
century.
during the Civil War.
But he basically thought and created a cornerstone of liberalism, which says that if you don't have like a modern state where people sacrifice very basic freedoms to live in a city state where there's going to be law and order and authority and hierarchy, that you are going to be living just in Game of Thrones pure raids all the time style, where raiders and bandits are going to come around every other week and just set fire to everything.
Hobbes' ideas, because obviously he's writing at the time of the Civil War, so he I think he was in France because he was kind of in exile during the interregnum, because I think he favoured to an extent the royalists. Basically, law and order had broken down because the state it had collapsed, but basically two factions of the state, Parliament and the King, had been at war with each other. And then also, but Hobbes' conclusion is so weird because Parliament's army and there's the King's army and they're fighting each other, and he's talking about, oh, look how horrible the violence is when there is not this Leviathan that's all powerful. And then he draws this conclusion that life without an all-powerful state, life without an all-powerful sovereign is nasty, brutal and short, and that's what the state of nature is, and that's human nature. And he's also writing at there's 30 Years' War, the European wars are going for, but it's like, well, these wars and these violence are they're either states fighting other states or factions attempting to control the state. You know, that level of horrific mass violence is only possible through the institution of the state. But Hobbes' conclusion is the fucking opposite, where he goes, do you know what? The state just needs to be more powerful. His state of nature, his idea of what the world is like without a state, you know, he's pretending to be empirical because at least he's made the step of at least not saying do what you're told because God says so. He's not doing a divine right of kings. He's making an argument for monarchy that is actually you need to do what the monarch says, because if the state collapses, that's going to be a big problem and lots of people will die. But he creates this state of nature, which is the supposed way humans are when there isn't a state. But he's not doing it. He's not doing like anthropological studies of stateless societies or looking at the history. He's just making one up in his head and then drawing unhinged conclusions from it and pretending it's empiricism.
And it's the same unhinged conclusion that like the word anarchism is just commonly just means like things have gone mad now. And nothing works. Everyone's running around in opposite directions. Everyone's setting fires.
Anarchists themselves will use that term, but it means like no state. So for an anarchist who's into that, they're like, yeah, no state, wicked, because that'll solve lots of problems. Right. But in many people's heads, they'll be like, oh, no state. And it's funny because I think people who think that, it's like, would you be doing horrible stuff if there wasn't a state? Because that's what it makes me think when you say that. And
it's the same people who's like, yeah, if the purge happened, there'll be just murders. It's like, you're telling me
you want to murder.
The only reason you're not murdering is because you're scared. You are a cowardly potential murderer.
Isn't the only reason evil doesn't happen because of violent deterrence? Huh? What? Sorry, mate. What are you saying? Can you sit further away from me, please?
I'd love to do a crime, but I'm so scared. But it's so like Hobbes has created that as like a pillar of like liberalism, as like hierarchy. Stars, guys, it would be great to have to do all these things, but we've got to lose some of our freedoms so that we can live in a hierarchy where we're safe. It's just one of those rules like no pudding until you've had your dinner. It's sad. I'd love to have my pudding now, but we have to have it after dinner because that's how we have order. And I think that's like really deep in a lot of people's brains. And also like since I'm doing a big leap a few centuries later, but like since Freud has set up like the founding philosophies that underpin a lot of psychology. And part of that is in your brain, there's all these mad things you want to do. Like if you have a dream where you set a fire, that could mean you're really an arsonist. And so we need all of these limits. Do you know what I mean? We need all of these limits on people's heads because inside people's brains are all these like beast emotions. And they just want to like punch and fuck, you know?
In defense of any psychiatrists or psychologists that might be listening, a lot of them do think Freud is mad. However, very much like Hobbes, the ideas of Freud and the ideas of Hobbes seem intuitively correct to people and are pretty widespread. So even if people go, yeah, Hobbes bit wrong or Freud bit wrong, their ideas are so pervasive that they're still important.
If you're a psychologist listening to this, you probably don't like rate Freud.
Yeah.
But like I can tell you, when I went to go and get counselling, they started doing like transactional analysis on me, and I consider that just neo-Freudianism. Like that's just another like ego, super ego, id model that's based on what your parents said to you when you were young, and that imprintation. Like this stuff's not gone. It's still part of the bones of these disciplines, and all of them are based on this idea that like humans are wrong-uns, right? Humans are wrong-uns, and we are kept safe from our own wrong-ness by other humans in part of a system. Liberalism just wants the panopticon, and that's the most fun they could imagine.
But it's the good panopticon, isn't it? It's like it's the commonality between liberalism and conservatism. Hobbes is seen commonly as the kind of father of European conservatism, but also he's daddy liberalism as well. And they're coming from, because everyone knows that conservatism comes from these premises of like humans are innately fucked and need to be controlled, and they need like authority figures, etc., etc. So much of that is carried over into liberalism as well, of like freedom to, like Locke. So he's the big person who then comes after Hobbes and is more so seen as the father of European liberalism. He was involved in the emergent slave trade and writing the Constitution of, I think, Carolina, where he had some control of kind of plantations there, or had investments in them, and he's writing stuff about human liberty while profiteering from slave labor. The links between kind of quite atrocious authoritarian thinking and liberalism are pretty bleak. And again, it's like that thing of, even Locke's coming from the assumption that people will do rough shit if they get away with it. And it's like, yeah, you would think that if you owned slaves.
In Bristol, there's a little museum to like all the slavery, what they did. And there's this diary entry on the wall there that I remember reading, and it had a massive impact on me. But it was this guy just talking about like sending all these slaves over. And he was like, if this was wrong, like someone would stop me, right? Like if this was bad, someone would, or God would stop me. Like this has to be okay because no one is stopping me from doing it. And you can tell like this guy's kind of twisted up, being like, listen, if you put doing slavery in front of me, I'm going to do it. But like, if it's not right, can someone just tell me, please? Like no one's told me not to, so it must be all right. There is this feeling that once you've decided that society is just and represents justice, that the things that it doesn't prevent or the things that it doesn't criminalize must be not just permitted, literally okay and fine and part of virtuous activity. There's on Hobbes on one end is the fear of the ravages of a wild civilization of just raiders and people with torches running around the woods all day, screaming constantly. But there's this other feeling, which is society holds up this idea of what is good and protects it to some degree. And so how could things be terrible here? How could there be like real genocide or murders, or how could there be systemic violence? I would have heard about that. Someone who wasn't like some mad podcaster would have told me that. It would be in the papers. Do you know, like society regulates itself. Someone would have told me if this stuff was awful. Someone that I trust, right? Someone with a blue tick or a big job. Someone with a really, really wide chair.
It's fun to watch people who assume, and again, it tends to be liberals, the sort of absolute like slack-jawed awe you get from some, quite highly paid political commentators when they witness things like the Sun, a newspaper, doing something fucked, or a politician not adhering to some norm they're supposed to adhere to, or there just being no consequences for some fucked behavior. Like what's going on? It's like, it's almost like all these institutions that you think are good are just an expression of social relations.
And I'll never get over the amount of people that still now is go, oh, don't worry, the government's looking into it, and hopefully they'll just prosecute themselves. Thank God. Oh, thank God we've got this system in place.
Well, I can't believe the left just keeps saying, but Iraq about Tony Blair. Hello, there was an inquiry.
Don't you remember the inquiry?
It's actually pretty comprehensive.
What happened?
Lots of experts.
It is huge.
Yeah.
It is huge. It is very long.
Big. Yeah.
To them, like, a consequence is just someone going, yeah, you did do a murder. Anyway, See you later. Well, egg on your face. Someone's just said you are a murderer. Well, off I go as well. Have a good day. So there is, like, I don't accept. I mean, we've like referenced it several times, but like fundamentally, I don't accept the idea that without law or without a police force, it would just mean that crime happens. We're not held back. I think that a lot of crime happens because people end up in very extreme circumstances, whether poverty or whether part of just something in their life has either been made terribly bad or just failed to be treated in some way. And yet there is a group of people who I do think do premeditated murders all the time and get away from it. The very people who say we need a society, we need the government, and I am the government, and our job is to stop recklessness and murder breaking out. They are the people who can just kill with impunity and do so not even out of a crime of passion. It's just to like balance a bunch of numbers.
Yeah.
Like the Hobbes's nasty, brutish and short existence is government. It is the personification of the state.
I mean, even a recent one, the proposed massive cuts to foreign aid budget, as much as foreign aid is like a completely fucked thing where it's just a transfer of wealth from, the state to corporate interests or whatever. And there's loads of like boomerang aid and all that kind of stuff where they just say they're going to give money to some deprived, underdeveloped country. And then the money just goes back into the imperial core. Nonetheless, those decisions are going to kill a lot of people and diminish the lives of thousands of others. And that is a decision that can only necessarily be made by a state. And the cops ain't even going to investigate that.
That's just not illegal. Do you know what I mean? Like
it is. It not only is it not illegal, it's the state which manifests law that is doing it.
Yeah.
It's not only not illegal, it is the law. The law is doing that.
The law is the purge.
During the time that men live without a common power to keep them all in awe, they are in that condition which is called war, and such a war as is of every man against every man, where every man is an enemy to every man, and which is worst of all, continual fear and danger of violent death, and the life of man is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Signed, Mr. Thomas Hobbes, age 63 and a half.
Human beings sure are lucky civilization came along to hoy us all out of the cack. Before gatehouses, policemen, CCTV, all human interaction could be summed up by a looping gif of cavemen bonking each other on the head with a thick club in the shape of a chicken drumstick. Were it not for the bittersweet medicine of a repressive society, then who's to say how many people would not be in beast mode right now? That's why I never venture too far into the countryside, lest the urge to kill consume me completely. Thomas Hobbes was the first big hitter in telling us that human beings are simply a box of murder energy. But the more modern formulation comes from Freud. In his 1929 book Civilization and Its Discontents, Freud sketches out the human being as a creature with immutable drives for individual pleasure, driven to violent behaviour towards authority figures, sexual competitors, and anything that obstructs their crusade for individual gratification. Here is a guy in desperate need of some female friends. The job of civilization is to temper these feelings and tamp them deep down so that we can all enjoy a lovely walk without someone doing an axe to our bones. The repression not only keeps us safe, but it also stops us doing violence. And if we're prevented from doing violence, we also can have a more fulfilling life. It's easier to make friends if you don't murder everyone in sight. But these are both majorly pessimistic worldviews. That pessimism has a pretty clear material cause. Hobbes was responding to the upheaval of the English Civil War, Freud responding to the upheaval of World War I, and by the time World War II finishes, people en masse are pretty ready to accept that we're all vicious little gremlins that need to be kept in check. Even just knowing about the basics of the world wars now is a pretty convincing argument that some monstrous force lurks within the beating heart of man. But it's this basic mistrust and fear of humanity that I really want to push back on. Firstly, civilization is not the cure for this kind of brutality. It is the cause. These weren't hordes of marauders roaming the countryside. These were wars. And like all wars, they're made possible by the constant state of competition between political factions, nation states, territories. In a Hobbesian state of nature, these things don't exist. In a Hobbesian state of nature, a world war simply couldn't happen. And if human beings are inherently bloodthirsty, why did we have conscription? Why did people return from these wars utterly traumatized? In short, I think they've got it all backwards. Authority, hierarchy, repression. These only provide more motivation for violence. Secondly, what is this repression if not violence itself? If your aim is to minimize brutality against people, when you hear what these foot soldiers of your police state are doing to people, you're going to do a shit. Thirdly, what kind of creature is a human supposed to be in this world? An absolute horrible murder machine built to lie and steal and overpower and grasp and grab and consume. You're telling me you pop this guy into a police state and it'll suddenly calm down completely and develop an interest in poetry and social work and tiddlywinks? It's like you're telling me you trapped a xenomorph in a panopticon and it's suddenly got really into learning the trumpet. So many fundamental claims about how people should be governed are built on top of claims about what kind of a thing a human is. A big argument against radical change like communism, anarchism, socialism is that humans are inherently selfish, grasping little creatures. Anything founded on mutual trust will therefore collapse. But any evidence drawn to justify this claim is drawn from the behaviours of humans who already live in a coercive, unequal and repressive state. People are selfish, just look at the selfishness performed by these insecure gig economy workers. People are lazy, look at the unemployment rate in these ex-mining villages. People murder each other, look at all the huge propaganda campaign offering secure work in the army. People hurt each other, look at the knife crime that tracks to poverty in dense urban areas. People simply aren't compassionate. I approached a family of strangers eating alone and asked if I could have a third of their son's pizza in return for an all-day bus and tram ticket, and I got hot gravy thrown at me just because I tried to get on the table. There is a hard limit to what you can learn about a creature by studying how it behaves in captivity. Lastly, if all this is based on claims about what human beings in the state of nature might be like, maybe it's worth looking at humans who live furthest from modern society and see if their behaviour does conform to the conjecture of white Europeans after all. The accounts of actual anthropologists paint a completely different story. Described by anthropologist Joanna Overing as a functioning anarchist society, the Piaroa people of Venezuela are considered one of the most peaceful societies in the world. They see competition as spiritually evil, they reject authority and hoarding resources outright. The Tiv people of central Nigeria see all authority as inherently suspect and believe people can only attain power by consuming the power of others. In the Malagasy state of Highland Madagascar, decisions are made by consensus. Adults giving orders to other adults is viewed with suspicion. The Palawan people of the southern Philippines have no hierarchy between age and gender. They do not recognise authority outside of seeking counsel for those who pass on skills or knowledge freely to others in the tribe. And the shared feature of all these societies, in addition to being non-hierarchical, is that they're peaceful. Violence is rare and murder is almost unheard of. And the prevalence of peaceable anarchistic social structures in tribal society is so frequent that there are anthropologists suggesting that these are the remnants of what was once the dominant mode of human society on Earth. So maybe the pre-civilization world wasn't just the Hunger Games up until the invention of irrigation. Hey, if you're listening to this, you found Disclaimer Corner. Yeah, it is possible to find tribal societies that are both hierarchical, violent, or both, and there are a good many anarchist-described societies whose treatment of women is very bad. And I don't think these tribes represent some kind of ideal way of living, just they show you don't need to be repressed to be peaceful and cooperative. Basically, don't become a primitivist. I do not want to return to a pre-agrarian society. Antiseptic was the best medical invention of all time. Don't message me, don't email me. I'm not willing to argue about this. Violence and brutality is built into our society and our economy, and not into human nature. And if aliens landed with a completely different kind of nature, but they nevertheless had to eke out a living in our economy, they'd probably have to do a lot of the same stuff. They'd have to sell their labour to whoever would take it, they'd have to return profits to shareholders, the military-industrial complex would still exist, and they would still require soldiers and war. Compared to that, I just don't see how violence is built into the structure of me and 20 randos living in a farm outside the perimeter of society. I mean, I can't promise we won't have a dust-up or two if Pavel fucks up the carrots, but no one's evading Iraq. We couldn't if we tried. We might try, but we wouldn't. It wouldn't happen. From a farm? No, not happening. And the only reason these things aren't viable is because if I start up a little communal farm in the UK, one day a Jeep will roll up and someone will say out of the window of that Jeep,
Actually, I own this land because my dad owned this land, and his dad owned his land before that dad. And if you don't leave, I'm going to Battle of the Beanfield you. Goodbye.
In 1890, Anton Chekhov went to the island of Sakhalin and wrote about his experiences meeting the Nivka people who lived there. He said these guys have got no concept of justice, no courts, no authority. Children are treated with the same respect as adults. They were peaceful, honest, no signs that violence was in any way a part of their lifestyle. And Chekhov wrote that the Nivka people struggled to understand his way of life, right up until them not using roads. There'd be a road built through like dense taiga forest, and they just still use the forest. And that's fascinating to me. Maybe to them a road just represents the journey its builder wanted to make. And if you don't want to make that exact journey from A to B, you're not going to use that road. Not when the forest's right there. I think about that a lot. I think, wow, what a way to live. Probably a lot slower, like really slow. Couldn't be me. I would never do that. But still, wow, that's living. That's freedom. I ended up reading about a very recent serial killer who, at all points in the story, is grossly incompetent.
They're not Moriarty, is what you're saying.
Yeah, so they're not Moriarty.
Yeah.
So they were known as the Grinder Killer, and one disclaimer is like, this is a date rapist in the gay community who killed their victims. Quite likely, a lot of the reason this stuff wasn't investigated properly is because of institutionalized homophobia on part of the police, and they're just going to think it's too icky to work out who killed a gay man, so they kind of didn't.
Yeah.
These murders, so overwhelmingly obvious what's going... I'll just talk you through how this works, right? So this guy would date rape and murder men he met on Grindr. Mm-hmm. And the first person he does it to, he has a body to dispose of, right? That's always the problem with serial killing. You have a body to get rid of.
Yeah.
So he leaves it outside his flat.
Right.
And
what? Whose flat? Whose flat? The murderer's flat or the victim's flat?
The murderer leaves it outside their own flat. Because this person has died of an overdose of a recreational drug, they put that drug in their coat pocket and then they call it in. And then the police come and they go, nothing suspicious here. This guy just took an overdose. Must be one of these things they're doing in the gay community now. The guy who rang it in, the murderer, Stephen Port, he originally goes, I don't know who this guy is. I just found this and then I rang it in. But then the friends of the victim say, oh, by the way, here's the address that our friends said they were staying in that night. And the police got that and went, oh, that's the address of the guy who called it in. They arrested him. And he goes, yeah, I did know him actually. And he did die in the flat. But he just must have overdosed when I wasn't looking. And I panicked and I just put the body outside. And they go, yeah, this checks out.
What?
Sorry for troubling you. They
What?
The police confiscated his laptop and his phone, but they never searched either of them, which is a bit of a shame because his search history was all about how to poison people and how to do date rape, but they never looked.
What the fuck?
But because of this,
I bet if this guy was fucking pirating Shrek, they'd have got him.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If you download Beyonce's Lemonade, they'll be carting you away.
Oh my God.
But because this happens, this guy who's like not a bright guy is like, oh, I can do this. Then this can happen again. So he does exactly the same thing again, and this time instead of leaving the body outside his flat, he drags it on a bed sheet,
right,
from his flat, his front door of his flat, to the cemetery across the road. Oh, fuck! And then plants the same drug in like the coat pocket of the victim's body.
He's done the same crime again.
He's done the same crime, but
slight
this
variation
is now like 150 meters away.
It's by his house.
It's right next to his flat.
Yeah.
Then it's found by a dog walker. It was called in. The police find it and they go, nothing suspicious here. This is because they overdosed and they've got the drug here, so nothing suspicious.
Fucking hell.
So the friends and family try to get in touch and are absolutely blanked by the police. But they're saying this guy didn't take drugs. This really isn't like him. This is very extraordinary behavior. We think there's foul play. Nothing. No investigation launched. Murder number 3.
Fuck's sake!
This is where things start getting bonkers. He does the exact same thing again and takes a body using the exact same method, puts it on a bed sheet, takes it to the exact same spot in the cemetery, does the exact same thing. It's found by the exact same dog walker. It is the same guy who finds the third one. But then this time, he's included a fake suicide note on the body. And this suicide note is the most suspicious fake thing I've ever seen.
Oh.
The third victim owns up to the murder of the second victim.
Oh my God, come on.
It says, I killed him, I'm so sorry. And then it says, this is verbatim, BTW, do not blame the other guy whose house I was with, the guy in the flat across the road. He was nothing to do with it.
No, it doesn't fucking say that.
It says BTW.
You fuck off. It says that.
It says
this
the
is.
guy
Are
in the
you reading
flat
off
across
4chan? Double check the URL.
This was got from the papers. I got this out of. You can look
Did the
this up on,
papers
like,
get it from 4chan?
The papers did not get it from 4chan. The papers got it from like police records.
That's fuck. This is. I'm so. There's so many things that are troubling about this. I just don't want to believe it. This is fucked. That is so fucked.
Do you know what I mean? And the police went,
yes,
nothing suspicious here. And great, because we found out who killed the other guy. And we don't need to do an investigation into the guy in the flat across the road because this note says it wasn't him.
Wow.
Do you know what I mean? It's really obvious that something's wrong. And it feels like the police are like Wile E. Coyote running into a drawing of like a tunnel.
I mean, they're so fucking useless. Did anything down the line happen to? So obviously people have found out that this guy did it. What's the?
Yeah, they did. After the fourth murder, eventually enough friends and family
So what
members,
was the fourth murder?
He murdered someone and put them in the exact same spot in the graveyard.
But he'd already said that's going to fuck it up. You don't put the note on the third one, then do that.
Yeah, because if the third guy's the murderer, how did this fourth body come about? You're absolutely right. He's not a good serial killer. I'd say that's not his worst crime. His worst crime is probably the murders. But you're right, in terms of narrative and continuity, this does not add up. Fucking hell.
Basically, the families of the four people had to just kick off.
Essentially, it was families and friends kicking off because it's spreading through the gay community and people start making connections and links and then they start doing their own research. And then once you start like looking at the profiles, there's like a commonality of people who've been talking to on different websites, and they could pinpoint it was him. But it's like they should have pinpointed it was him.
The community actually did it, not the cops.
Normal people had to do it. Yeah. Non-police had to do it, and then they had to force the cops. So they kept saying like, "Did you like check this bedsheet for DNA?" Because they had when they took Stephen in after the first murder, they took his DNA. So his DNA was on record. So if they ever checked the DNA on these bodies, on their clothes, on the bed sheet they were dragged there, it would have led them to the guy across the road. And also, after they got the suicide note, the coroner asked the lead detective, so have you checked with the family if this is even his handwriting? And the detective said yes, but that wasn't true.
Oh. So they lied. They were shit and they lied.
They just didn't want to investigate, I think. There has been, however, here's some good news. There has been an inquest after 3 years.
Oh, with the cops looking into the cops?
Well, you know, it's not all bad. One of the 17 officers being investigated actually gave an interview. The rest refused. And the watchdog has decided not to offer any disciplinary procedures or penalties to the police. A new one has been launched, which will start next year, although I imagine it'll have the same outcome.
For fuck's sake, man.
It's fucked, isn't it?
Yeah, that is fucked.
Literally, like, there's nothing to make you feel like if you got murdered, the police would do anything to, like, work out what happened.
Yeah.
And then if you add on top of that being gay or being black or just being anything, the police are like, I don't give a shit. Like, wasn't it during, like, last year, like, a black teenager was missing in London, and the police said, if his mom can't find him, I don't know what you want us to do. Like, what's the fucking point of having a police? Like, defund
the cops have almost got it there.
Exactly. It's so close to getting it, right?
Yeah.
Of the cops going, we're not going to help. It's like, okay, well, let's just not spend money on you
fuck
guys.
You then. Mandatory Redistribution Party was created and produced by Sean Morley and Jack Lewis Evans. Our title theme was created by Ella Jean with additional music by Jack Lewis Evans and Sean Morley. Please consider supporting us if you are able at patreon.com/Mandatory Redistribution Party or by sharing this episode with your friends or line manager. Thanks for listening. Stay safe. Farewell.